Okay, so I think we're going to get started here. It's now almost 2 minutes after 2 o'clock. Just wanted to, again, thank everybody for coming. We'll start off with a couple brief introductions. So my name is Paul Staz. I'm the head of sales here at Strongpoint, and I have on the line with me Liam Gainey. Liam's responsible for all kinds of things over at Strongpoint, but there's a lot with our documentation optimization and our flashlight product, which we'll talk about shortly. So what are we going to walk through with you today? We're here to talk about SOX compliance for NetSuite. We'll begin with a quick discussion of some of the key challenges that we see or that we hear from our customers. This isn't like an end-to-end guide of everything that you need to do to be compliant. Instead, we're going to talk about some of the key stumbling blocks. And it just so happens that those are stumbling blocks that Strongpoint helps with. So, the intent here isn't really to just talk about our product, but we will still be talking about our product and how it can help you guys. There is a chat box. There's a question box. Please feel free to submit questions along the way. I will keep my eye on it, and if I see things pop in, I'll make sure to answer them along the way if I can. And if not, I will do my best to save some time towards the end of the session today. So we're scheduled for 30 minutes. We're already 3 minutes in. We'll get started, and I'll do my best to finish on time. So we're going to start with a quick discussion of key challenges. And the way that I always like to phrase this is that the best thing about NetSuite is that you can customize it in so many ways to meet your specific business requirements. And the worst thing about NetSuite is that you can customize it in so many ways to meet your specific business requirements. So you then have a heavily customized system, and this can be brand new. You're inheriting it from an implementation team, maybe multiple partners, or this can be like 15 years old, and it's been customized and changed a ton of times along the way. So what do you need? You need to have easy access or a good understanding of the customizations and dependencies that are in your system. And one of the things that I always like to say, my line is that saved searches are not all created equal. So you can have a saved search that's used one time for a single purpose, single user, a couple people doing it, not connected to any critical systems or processes. And that saved search is not material. It shouldn't really even be in scope for audit. It doesn't matter, right? But there's other saved searches that are connected to critical customizations, critical objects. There's workflows, there's scripts, there's all kinds of automation built in that they're connected to. I have a story that I like to tell of an old customer of ours who had a saved search connected to a workflow that was used for billing. And the saved search pulled this month's invoices and the workflow sent them out. Somebody changed that saved search from this month to forever, and all of their invoices ever were sent out, all because somebody made a change to a saved search, right? And I think that that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks, is that it's easy to keep line of sight to things that are changing inside system notes, but how can you understand the significance, the risk, the materiality of those changes if you don't understand dependencies, right? So that's a really key step, and we'll talk about that. Strongpoint can do that in a variety of different ways, and the best part about it is that you don't need full-blown enterprise compliance, governance controls, all this kind of stuff, at least to get partway there. We've got a great tool to get you started down that path, and we'll talk about that shortly. So next point here. So with what I just mentioned in mind about dependencies, so let's talk about change controls. Anybody that is interested in compliance, has an internal or an external audit presence, probably has talked about change controls and how different types of changes need to be treated in different ways. And this specifically is with respect to configuration changes or changes to settings and preferences and things like that, or the changes or modifications to existing user roles or the assignment of those roles. So how can you put in place live and automated controls inside NetSuite? And then one thing that we talk a lot about over at Strongpoint is how can you leverage those both proactively and reactively? And so what I mean by that is leveraging these controls to automate impact analysis. right? Use your controls to understand the process and release strategy that you need to follow and the types of people that need to be engaged, and if you need approvals and testing and so on and so forth, right? If you're only using your controls for audit, you're not leveraging them actually as a bit of an advantage or a way to be more productive. So we can show you how to automatically do that. And then I say reactive here as well, because a lot of customers really struggle with reviewing through system notes and reconciling back to originating change requests and trying to make sense of it all from spreadsheets, basically, right? And if you're able to instead do this automatically, then your controls can really be used to automate that process. And what I mean by that, and I'll elaborate further in a quick demo, is that we can show you, here are all of your control violations, and that's a way for you to easily isolate and identify risky material significant changes from all of the others. Again, how can I separate the 4 saved searches that have dependencies from the other 150 that changed in this period? Well, you can do it with controls, because a saved search connected to something else would violate a control, whereas a saved search that isn't connected to anything doesn't. And I'll show you more about that soon, but this is a really key challenge. So the third point here, and this is something that most organizations put a ton of time into during an implementation process, and then it's much more difficult to maintain. And so we talk often to customers who are doing this very manually in spreadsheets. They're passing emails off for approvals and things like that for the assignment of new roles, or people don't do it at all, right? And then what ends up happening over time, again, maybe you're one of the people in the room that have a 10 or a 12 or a 15-year-old implementation, and your roles, permissions, and assignments are a mess. People have unused roles, logins that they don't use anymore are out there. There's all kinds of problems here. And passing an audit specifically for segregation of duties when that's the current state of your roles and permissions is really challenging, time consuming, and you likely end up dealing with a spreadsheet that has a couple thousand lines in it of violations, and you've got no way out. So what Strongpoint does, first of all, for those that have aged implementations, is that we give you cleanup tools so that you can get rid of all of that mess before you start to implement controls. And then going forward, our controls are real time. And you can see, at the point of assignment, as soon as you assign a role, if it's a violation or not, and we can actually even block those assignments from taking place, which is another big prevention that we're starting to hear more of. It's not just about going through an audit at the end of the year. It's about proactively being able to defend your system in real time. Final challenge is mitigating and compensating controls. So, variety of sizes of customers use NetSuite. We have customers that are, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 users. We also have, thousands of users in some environments. And so segregation of duties can be really challenging because it isn't one size fits all, especially for global organizations where maybe you've got, a small team in Ireland that follows different rules than the team in North America, for example. And so how can you put in place segregation of duties when there's like 4 people in the office? So instead, what you often need to do is use mitigating controls. And so people are often building custom workflows to do that. So really common thing that comes up is like journal entries, right? Making sure that people aren't creating and approving their own by building custom workflows. A lot of people will have their own saved searches to try to monitor for specific types of activities, but it ends up being a mess. Right? How can you track it all? And then the challenge is that your auditors will come in, they'll start asking you questions that you weren't prepared for, that you don't have controls built for, and then you end up just customizing more and more and more, and then it just gets messier and messier and messier. And unless you have appropriate controls in your system, how can you even prove that those saved searches are accurate and complete and that they haven't been changed themselves? And furthermore, how can you prove that anybody is doing anything with those saved searches? Right, that's another challenge. Is maybe you can build something to identify a number of violations. Right, thinking again back to like journal entries or something like that. How can you prove that somebody's actually opened up the email and taken action on that? Are you doing it in a spreadsheet, or how trustworthy is that if that's the case? Right, so we'll talk about how we've been able to take kind of save search functionality and enhance it a little bit natively inside NetSuite to expand those capabilities for you as well. Okay. So I will pause for a second and I'll jump out of this presentation and jump into NetSuite. But the demo that I'm about to show you should run for about 15 minutes, and it's going to touch on those 4 bullet points, right? So how do I know what's in my system and understand my dependencies? And from there, we'll talk a little bit about change controls and how I can use those both proactively and reactively. And then I will jump in and talk a bit about segregation of duties and compensating controls. Okay. So first box that I have up here, first tab, is our entity relationship diagram. So first of all, what you can do here is click through and navigate to any record inside your system. We'll select the customer record. And so Strongpoint has put all this together automatically for you. It's maybe taken about an hour of your time to set it up with us. But so now what I can do is click Show ERD. I'm going to navigate to my customer record, and Strongpoint is automatically going to show me everything on the customer record. And I can click through. So let's say I want to take a look at this company size field. So this is a list, and Strongpoint's automatically going to show me that it's connected downstream to these 2 searches. And I can then visually click through and say, okay, well, what's this search connected to and what's this search connected to? And if I needed to, I can even dig in more detail, open up a record here and dive in, and I can see the configuration of it. So any formulas that are there, filters, any fields that are involved. I can see if there's any related objects I need to be concerned with. I saw that on the previous page as well. I can also see things like the date last used, or the subsidiaries that are using it, or the employees that are using that customization. So here I've been able to very quickly go through our documentation system and navigate through the dependencies and understand usage. But doing that natively would take a very significant amount of time. You can do it in seconds with Strongpoint. A second example here for you would be, we've got a checkbox connected downstream to a workflow, connected downstream to a couple scripts and a search. And so here I can see a much more complex picture. And anything that's going to be changed here would require a significantly higher level of change control than what I just showed you previously. One would absolutely be in scope in audit, and the other one would not be. One should have approvals, the other one doesn't really need to, right? So this is kind of how Strongpoint works, is that we've built all of this, and now you get to leverage this information. And the entity relationship diagram is only one way to do it. You can also do searches. So we've got what we call an impact search form. So you can go through and select anything inside your system. Here I'll select workflows, for example. Now by type, or I can look at specific things instead, or by owner. But Strongpoint is going to show me every workflow in my system. And then this can be customized, but you're looking at the name, the type, the parent, the date last used, the script ID, if it's connected to a bundle, it's listed there for you, and all of its dependencies are listed here for you as well. So really valuable set of tools just in terms of understanding what you've got in your system and how it's all connected. So we've worked with a number of customers. You often see this in smaller life sciences, biotech type organizations that are maybe relying heavily on partners as well, where they have an auditor that says, just show me that you know everything in your system, right? Like a first step of audit. And so doing that on your own is nearly impossible if you're a lean, publicly traded biotech company. And if you have to go out and pay a consultant, it's going to take 6 or 8 or 10 weeks and going to cost a good chunk of change. And as soon as it's finished, it's already going to be out of date. And so instead, Strongpoint can do this automatically for you. It'll take a couple days to run, but only requires about an hour of your time. So it's kind of the first step. The second step was around change controls. So what Strongpoint gives you the ability to do, and we have one that comes out of the box, so don't think that you need to start from scratch here, but you can work and set up different levels of change control that are required for different types of changes, which makes sense, right? If you're making a simple change to a field or a search that's not connected to anything else, you really don't need a high level of change control. You don't need special approvals to do that. Whereas if you're making a change to something that impacts a script, or if you're making a change to the script itself directly, then that should require a higher level of change control. You should need approvals, and you should need testing and development, and so on and so forth. And so what Strongpoint allows you to do is to set all of those. And we've had all kinds of customers that actually get recommendations from their internal and external audit teams on the different levels of change control by type, right? It's not like we're reinventing the wheel here. We're just giving you a way to automatically do it inside NetSuite. And so now I talked about using this information both proactively and reactively, right? Like let's use these controls to streamline processes. And so inside our change request here, what you can do is actually set customizations in scope for change as part of a ticket. This is your typical change request. You provide a user story, an overview of what you're going to do. And then what's different is that you select what's in scope. And then what Strongpoint's going to automatically do for you is take those 4 customizations that you see over here on the left and run them through our documentation engine. And it's going to look at them and understand what they're connected to and all the dependencies and how they're being used. And then it's going to take all of that information and compare it to those policies. And it's going to automatically advise you on the level of change control that's required. It's going to show you who needs to approve it. And it's going to show you for each one of these 4 things if they can be safely deleted or modified, like this one can be, or if they cannot be safely deleted or modified. And it's going to notify you of some warnings and plain English so anybody can understand it, even if they're not necessarily a technical NetSuite expert. And it's going to list out impacted customizations as well. So it really levels the playing field. Everybody gets access to this information quickly and easily. You can do deeper dives right from this change request page inside the DRD that we saw earlier to understand impact and dependencies. And that's really going to help you understand, so why do I need a full software development lifecycle, and why do these people need to approve? And here's your explanation down below. And so this is how you would proactively leverage controls and the Strongpoint tools to help you understand what you need to do in order to make changes in a way that would be compliant. So next step, again, that was reactively. So, and this is the case for a lot of our customers. So a lot of our customers don't need to do or don't want to do full change request and approval for everything that we do. And that can be for a variety of reasons, right? Maybe it's team size, or maybe it's just a brand new implementation and there's so many changes going on that doing approvals would slow them down. Or maybe the maturity of the change processes just aren't there yet. Maybe they were a private company that just got bought, and now all of a sudden they need to go and start operating in a completely different way, and they need to take baby steps. So a lot of our customers won't even necessarily use the change request to its fullest extent, and instead they just leverage what we call the open non-compliant change request. Or sorry, the open non-compliant change report, rather. So what this does is that you've got the documentation, you've got the change controls in place, and Strongpoint is always monitoring every change that happens and checking that change against your controls. So what you can then do is go in and say, well, like, let's see every change that happened inside or since February 1st, for example, that violated a control. And so what you're going to see here is only a list of risky changes that have happened. You see a lot of user role changes here because we use them in our demos all the time. But you'll also be able to filter this down by type if you needed to. And so you can go through and select, have any workflow changes taken place, or have any, and no, none have, or can you go through and what about searches or scripts, or user role changes and assignments and setup preferences and anything like that. And anytime anything changes within here that violates a control, it would automatically appear. And so here we're getting all kinds of nones, which is great. Again, demo environment and your environment are likely to be a little bit different. But what you're going to see is just a summary of all changes that have happened. And here's maybe a good example. So this is a Suitelet scripted change. It's identified automatically as being a high-risk change, and we can alert you to that. And so then, rather than using a change request proactively and getting approvals and so on and so forth, people will just look at this after the fact, and then they can go through and review and resolve them. So all of these changes, over here all have a summary of exactly what was changed. It's time-stamped, date-stamped by the employee that changed it. And then you can go through and you can give a resolution. So you can give an explanation of why, and then you can close this off. And so now going into an audit, you'd be able to say, I have visibility to everything in my system. I understand all the dependencies. These are my change controls. And here's a list of every change that happened inside my system that violated one of those controls. So it doesn't matter that there wasn't an approval. At least you're able to separate it onto a list and get visibility only to those risky things. So that's kind of really how we can help with that second bullet point. So the third bullet point that we talked about was segregation of duties and access controls. And so here what we're looking at is a library of SOD rules. So it comes out of the box, there's 146 rules to choose from. We can filter them down by the different types of processes that you're running inside NetSuite. But these really break into two different categories. So the first one is a two-sided rule. So you can have a base permission and a conflicting permission. In other words, if you have permission A, you can't also have permission B, whether it's in a single role or whether it's multiple roles that are assigned to the same user, and then they'd be able to flip back and forth and use too many permissions. So that's the first type of rule, a two-sided rule. The second type of rule is just a one-sided rule. So for a one-sided rule, this is where we basically say that regardless of what else you have, you can't have this one role or this one permission. So what we commonly see here for one-sided rules is maybe the administrator role. So you can't have access to the administrator role unless it's been approved first. And what Strongpoint can do for any of these is actually turn on a blocking control. So we talked about this briefly earlier about how many auditors are starting to say that just reviewing these things at the end of the year for violations is not sufficient, or at the end of a period is not sufficient, and it needs to be more real-time and continuous. And these actually put steps in place to prevent access in the first place. That's how Strongpoint does it. And so I'll show you this just quickly. So I'm going to come into our friend John Smith's employee record. His wife Jane also works for us, but I decided to pick John today. So you can see that John's SOD status is currently clear. But if I go into edit his employee record, I come down to access, and I go into assign the administrator role. What we'll see here is that I'll try to save this option, and Strongpoint's going to immediately run a check. It's going to notice that the administrator role has a blocking conflict against it, and it's going to tell me that there's a rule that's been violated here. This is the one that was violated, and this is the role that's causing the permission. And it'll give me an opportunity to complete a change request right from that screen, or I can open it up and do it separately, and I can say things like, I want this person to have access to this role at this time, it gets approved, and then that would have gone through. But otherwise, it doesn't. So you can see here that I'm going back to the tab, and I'm seeing that the administrator role has not been added for John. I'm going to show you a second example quickly. I think we're doing okay for time. I'm almost done. So if I come in here to give him a different controller role. So I know that one of these roles has a permission that allows you to create journal entries, and the second one has a permission that allows you to approve journal entries. And we have a two-sided rule turned on that says that a single user can't have access to both of those permissions, because they could just create and approve all they want. There's no oversight. So I can see here that the assignment went through. So there's now both of these roles assigned to John, which means that there wasn't a blocking control turned on. This is just a detective control, but we're now seeing a violation on John's user, on his employee record rather. So saying that users who make journal entries should not have the permission to approve them. And then there's a variety of ways that you can report on that. You can clear it here at this screen, or you can do more centralized reporting like what I showed you earlier with a non-compliant change report. So you can say, show me all of my violations and go through and clear them all. But either way, it gives you a way to understand risky assignments that have taken place inside your system. Really, really useful set of tools. You're not exporting your data out to a separate system. You're not analyzing this inside spreadsheets. And as part of the cleanup tools, which we can go over in another session, we even have the ability to help you clean up user roles and permissions. So that's the third bullet point, which again was segregation of duties. There's a lot of work that goes into these during new implementations, but then sometimes they get forgotten. And the final tab I'll show you here is really just about our mitigating or compensating controls, or as we call them, agent controls. And so what these allow you to do is monitor for specific record-based events or transactional activity that could be risky, or it could be the result of a segregation of duties that you just can't quite accommodate. So for example, let's say you've got a small team and you want to have a control that prevents people from creating and approving the same journal entry, but people need to have both of those permissions because sometimes they'll need them. What we can also do is leverage one of these, again, from a library of controls. And so this one here is being built to automatically monitor for any time that a single user both creates and approves the same journal entry. And this is basically a saved search. You can choose the behavior. You can choose whether you want notifications to go out immediately or how often it's running and who's being notified, the control owner or somebody else, linked back to kind of a risk control matrix to help you understand why it's actually taking place. And then we're automatically going to be tracking all of these violations for you. So anytime it happens, we'll capture that. And what you'll then do is go through a similar process to what I described for SOD and for your other change controls, where you get a list of violations or of non-compliant changes that you can then go through and review and resolve. And the beauty of it is that this is all within NetSuite. It's all kept within NetSuite. And when you're going through and reviewing and resolving, we're proving that, yes, this was looked at and this was cleared by this person at this time. You're no longer relying on doing this with saved searches and emails and spreadsheets and things like that. It's all done automatically for you. And again, you can leverage the libraries to do it. So that's the end of the demo for today. I'm going to bring up the slide again to just quickly summarize those 4 bullet points for you. Again, not all saved searches are created equally. So you need to understand, which ones you have that are more complex or the most complex and how they might be different. And you need to understand if they're changing. So first of all, if you're going to make a change to a saved search, you should have a tool to help you understand very quickly and easily if there are dependencies you need to be aware of and if approvals are required and so on and so forth. And then reactively, a way for you to kind of identify the needles in the haystack, so to speak. A lot of things changing. How do I know which ones are risky? So that's controls, right? The third biggest pain point that we often hear is maintaining segregation of duties and access controls. So it's super common for somebody to go through an audit and to come back with really bad feedback about how there's all of these assignments that are taking place and you don't know who's got what, and you end up with a big long list of violations you need to go and figure out by yourself. Well, we've got a methodology here to help you with that. You can take it on your own, but it's a pretty challenging process. And the fourth piece here is about more mitigating and compensating controls. And so we see a lot of customization, a lot of automation being built by customers, NetSuite customers, to take care of this risk. And we think that we've built a library of rules that really helps with a lot of it, and a set of tools that you can then build on to cover these spaces rather than needing to go off and customize all by yourself. So hope that was useful. We're at 29 minutes in. We have had a couple quick questions come through, and I see that Liam has been answering them on the go. I can sit tight if there's any other questions that anybody has. We're happy to sit here and chat. I can show you some other things in the system. If anybody has even unrelated questions, I'm happy to keep chatting. But for now, that's the end of the scheduled demo. The purpose of it was really just to highlight some key areas that we see customers struggle with when they're trying to meet SOX compliance requirements for NetSuite. And I gave a quick summary of how we help. So I do have another question that come in. Can I see the other questions asked? Yeah, sure. So we had a question that came through about Suite Analytics. So there was a question that said, is Strongpoint working with Suite Analytics yet? And so the idea behind it, we clarified with them a little bit, but the idea is that they wanted to have change controls in place for Suite Analytics workbooks. And so the short answer is that, we aren't quite there. We're working on documenting them and incorporating them into the change controls that we showed earlier. And this is, a really important pain point, I guess, that I can elaborate on as well. So reports in general are difficult to track changes to, right? And you can get some information directly from NetSuite, but system notes are quite limited, and some of that extends out to the Suite Analytics workbooks as well. So that's something that we do our best to help with, even just showing kind of date last used. And that's actually leading into the next question that we received. So we received a question that said, is all of this information available inside System Notes? And so the answer is not quite. And I'll actually jump in and give a quick demo to help answer that question in more detail. But workflows, for example. So System Notes inside workflows will show you information about, the fact that something has changed. But we see a lot of customers that to monitor changes to workflows sit there taking screenshots. And it's like, well, this was the screenshot on this day, and this was the screenshot on that day, and our System Notes show that there hasn't been a change. But that's a really manual process for you to have to go out manually and screenshot workflows, period by period. And so a lot of what we do is just pulled from System Notes and then cataloged in a more efficient way. But then in addition to that, we do parse through every line of code inside scripts and extract dependencies that way as well. So there's a lot more that goes into that. And workflows are a really good example where we actually still do capture new values and old values, and we do side-by-side diffs for them. So here, for example, and this is going to be a lot of information up on the screen, but I'll show you what a diff for a workflow looks like, right? So we've captured, the date that it was created and the modifications that took place between the old and the previous version. We're showing you which policy a change to a workflow violated, and we're showing you the related change request that it was associated with when it was changed. So this is a really good example of an area that we do go beyond System Notes. I'll read the next question here. So does monitoring SOD changes require the NetSuite administrator role or only setting them up? That's a great question. So to monitor SOD changes, you absolutely do not have a role. So you can set this up, and then we can on an ongoing basis help you monitor for the changes taking place. And we can give you different levels of access, even just to the Strongpoint tools, so that you can go through and clear and resolve changes as they go. So the answer is no, you don't require a NetSuite administrator to use our SOD tools on an ongoing basis. Good question. So next question is, how do you assess managed bundle updates? So also a great question. And there's a couple answers to it. One of our customer success members could probably give you a better or more complete answer, but the way that I will respond to it is that we don't always have visibility inside managed bundles. So we can't tell you if a script is different in this version than its previous version because they're locked to us. But we can still see, the last modification date of them, for example. And then when you go into our change management reports, you can actually look at things like, bundle changes specifically, and you can even link to, or you can have this involved into a change management process where if you know that a managed bundle update is coming, you can also prepare a change request for it and have approval for it to come through. So then all changes that are associated with that bundle, when they happen, would automatically be linked back to that change request, which then streamlines your reporting for it because you can automate the reconciliation of those changes back to a request. So there are some limitations to what we can see, but we do still have visibility to some really critical things, and we have a methodology that helps you kind of streamline compliance for those changes. I hope that helps. Another way, I guess, would be if it was, like a sandbox install first. We do have an environment comparison tool that allows you to run a diff between environments. And so that would be one way for you to help understand the impact of a managed bundle update, not just from a compliance perspective, but just the functionality of the system. So that would allow you to do it that way. That same use case also extends to NetSuite releases. So if you've got Strongpoint in production and then release preview as a mirror of your production environment, you'd be able to take advantage of our environment comparison tool to help you understand some of the differences between the two. I'd like to say that one of the toughest things about planning and testing for a new NetSuite release is just understanding what the changes are and what the impacts are. And so that's how our environment comparison tool can help you. We don't automate testing, but we help you understand what needs to be tested and all of its dependencies and so on and so forth. That's the end of the questions so far. Anything else that anybody would like to see while we're here? Some people are dropping off, but I'm still hanging out. I'm working from home. I'm quarantined. I'm really lonely. Happy to chat. Okay, so I think we'll call it a day then. Again, just wanted to thank everybody for taking the time. You know, crazy time for everybody, I'm sure, but it's important to keep learning and finding new ways and better ways to do things. If anybody wants to jump into a more detailed demo, we will be sending out a copy of the recording for you. And we'll have some of our sales team kind of follow up to make sure if anybody needs a demo that we're happy to do it. So thank you. Appreciate everybody taking the time and hope to be back in touch with you soon.